some people are a bit critical of Campbell, but if you think about Monomyth this way, you're going along with your typical day, and then a crisis occurs, something terrible happens. How do you deal with the crisis? I think that's what most stories are about. We don't want to see characters who are just having a good day every single day, page after page. Sooner or later, we want to see the crisis. And I think the reason for that is you only find out who a person truly is when the crisis happens. How are you going to handle this particular situation? There's a film that I sometimes show my students, a clip. It's very brief. It's only about 3 minutes. Anyone can YouTube this. It's called Force Majeure. I don't know if you've ever seen this film, but there's a couple on vacation, and they've done well for themselves. They're at a ski resort, and they have their 2 small children with them. And while they're at the ski resort, they're enjoying a beautiful lunch outside on the terrace. And a controlled avalanche is set off at the resort. Here comes the snow, and it's heading directly toward that restaurant where the couple is sitting enjoying lunch. Well, the father gets so frightened that he leaps up out of his seat and runs away and abandons his wife and 2 small children to the avalanche. Meanwhile, the wife gathers up her 2 children and hugs them closely. She's prepared to go down with the ship, so to speak, you know. Here's the terrible crisis. We find out what the husband is like, and we find out what the mother in that scenario is like. And it's a revelation of character. Mm-hmm. Now, all right, apply this to the religion. Here comes the big crisis. Jesus is betrayed by someone. You know, that's a revelation of character for the person who's done the betrayal. And Peter, right, denies knowing him 3 times. It's a revelation of character. Meanwhile, Jesus is prepared to go through the whole thing. I mean, he asks for a reprieve from his father, but willingly. I've heard this as a definition too. All right, so the crisis happens, and the heroic character is the person who willingly puts himself or herself through the suffering, typically for a higher goal or for other people. So in Force Majeure, the mother in that scenario, she is willing to suffer for her children. If she knows she can protect the lives of those 2 small kids, she's going to do it. Meanwhile, the dad runs off, you know, which is a typical impulse. I think most of us instinctively would run away from danger. But there are times when you can control your fear and face the danger head on. Mm-hmm. I kind of learned that about myself just recently. I was on a vacation on a little island off the coast of Honduras called Roatan, and I was face to face with a reef shark. It was swimming very close to me. It took a lot of willpower to control the fear, but you can do it. Now, that wasn't in the service of some higher good. It was mainly self-preservation. But still. It was a little frightening. But you could imagine if you take both of those cases, Force Majeure and the story of Christ, literally just the absolute fear that you must confront, but willing to face that fear. And I think that's what Campbell is really getting at. It's the abyss is what you're looking for.
But one thing that I find fascinating, or let's say it's a hypothesis that I've been living with and I really wanted to ask you about, is that when you talk about various stories that we're attracted to as human beings, and then Campbell with his monomyth explaining how different mythologies have a similar pattern because they are always explaining those very human emotions and experiences that we all know and that we are, again, somehow attracted to. I have the feeling that in the Western secular world, let's say, we actually don't have several stories anymore that we're attracted to, but we kind of got stuck in one particular story, which is kind of the monomyth. But I'm not sure, because I'm not a scholar of Joseph Campbell or something. I haven't read much of his books. So I want you to enlighten me. not only whether I'm correct in thinking whether society has gotten stuck in one story, but whether Joseph Campbell perhaps meant it in a different way. Because what I see is nothing but the myth of the hero. You've got somebody who's a bit of the outcast. He goes through an adventure, encounters somebody who tells him you have to believe in yourself. Then he starts believing in himself, overcomes his fear, and then shines because he either slayed the monster or even almost died or completely died and resurrected, and then gives back some present to the rest of the world. Yes, that's part of the monomyth. And you see it everywhere. I mean, it's Rambo, it's the Disney, every Disney story is this same story, and it's also in Star Wars and so on, and it's also the type of storytelling that is being taught in scenario schools or in literature, that this is the way you make an exciting story. And it's almost as if we only know this story. For example, if you compare or contrast Disney movies with the anime movies from Japan, from Miyazaki and so on, then you'll see that in the Miyazaki movies, you've got this very Buddhist idea of doing your duty. There is no conquering. There's just, I do what I have to do because I have to do it. And often those stories for us in the West, they'll seem like they don't have the right arch in the story, because they go back and forward, because the line is whether you do your duty, not whether you conquer your fears necessarily. And also, if I think about the old myths, let's say Icarus or something like that. Icarus is probably the best example. It starts as a myth of the hero. He and his dad are stuck in the labyrinth, and then they try to get out because there's this monster, the Minotaur. And the dad is a scientist and he knows what to do, and so they paste feathers on their arms and they fly out. And the dad says, "Watch out, don't go too far, because if you get too close to the sun, you'll burn your feathers and the wax will melt and you'll fall into the sea." And the son is a bit young and hubristic, and so he's very happy to get out of the labyrinth, goes too close to the sun and dies. And so that's also a part. Most of our myths of the hero, whether in popular literature or movies or wherever, they tend to stop at the hero conquered everything. But in the old myths, there used to be this fall, there used to be this idea of hubris, there used to be still death somewhere around the corner, not just life. And if you look at society, we have this society which only thinks in terms of growing and getting bigger and getting even more money and showing off how great you are because you conquered all those, I don't know what kind of adventures that you encountered in your life. It has become also the story that you tell of yourself, and it seems like it's the only story you can tell yourself. We're all very busy all the time, because being busy shows that you're kind of conquering something. But in another mythological context, you could be just as happy with seeing the flower and experiencing the beauty and acknowledging that as the start and end point of all good life, just being there with the beauty. And so here I am. Am I correct in seeing this as like the monomyth of society? And has Joseph Campbell somehow been distorted? Did he have much more to say? And did people only derive this particular aspect of his monomyth and not see the other aspects of it?
I really was struck by how you were talking about a story, told through a Buddhist lens, and how it's a little bit different than Joseph Campbell's idea. I was just watching this analysis of J.R.R. Tolkien's Lord of the Rings, and there. So the theory goes that Tolkien didn't believe in a hero, that there are no heroes in life. There are only people who perform heroic deeds from time to time to the best of their ability. And sin, I think, can be defined as going against the Tao, if you will, or the natural order of things, or God's will. So for Tolkien, it's something like there's a heroic adventure. It's like you're trying to fulfill God's will, but no human being is capable of doing that. We're just too flawed. We're incapable. But you try to do the best you can. And I guess I have not finished the entire series. I just started reading it, as a matter of fact, Fellowship of the Ring, the first part of that. But it's such an old story. Everyone knows how it goes. But Frodo gets almost to the end of the adventure and then can't quite fulfill it by throwing the ring into the fire pit, right? He's gone as far as he can with that particular hero deed. But to describe anyone as heroic it's foolhardy. So, maybe you're right about that. Maybe we've become too obsessed, at least in commercial kinds of enterprises. Still, in serious literature, you do see someone who's not exactly matching the more commercialized version of Campbell's output. It's a little less Star Wars-like. I'm reminded of, say, great authors like William Faulkner, Herman Melville, and even James Joyce, which I think becomes more of an intellectual exercise than an emotional and an experiential one. But there, with Ulysses, you're dealing with Leopold Bloom, presumably the protagonist of the book, but, deeply flawed individual. And I still love the Greek tragedies and things, and Shakespeare, of course. I think there was an author, a British author named Will Self, and he said, the tragedy really with great storytelling literature like that is it's become a cultic enterprise. It's a little bit like classical music. You're always going to have an audience for classical music. You'll always have an audience for serious literature and storytelling. But it's going to be a small group of people, relatively speaking. And that most people are probably going to flock to the theaters to see the latest, Marvel movie or Superman movie or what have you. And that's, that commercialized version of the Joseph Campbell's hero myth. So you're probably correct in saying that. But I wonder if people deeply crave different types of stories with the flawed character. That can't go away. I mean, it would go against human nature and just nature in general, I think, to delude ourselves into thinking that people are constantly heroic all the time. It's a little bit narcissistic, isn't it? It's feeding into the ego, and the ego is always thinking it's in control of everything and needs validation constantly.
And so there's my question. What did Joseph Campbell say about it? Did he see that himself, that the hero motif could become this egotistic thing? Because in a sense, Campbell has this spiritual view of life where you should overcome the darknesses of your ego to become a more full human being, let's say. And did he acknowledge the possibility of this hero motif itself becoming egoic?
It's funny. I was just looking before this podcast at The Hero with a Thousand Faces again, and he actually says that hero motif is actually a disguise for the true hero is the person who can vanquish the ego, who can destroy the ego. But then he says you run into a problem. It's a real paradox. How can the ego destroy itself, which is what you're asking for? At some point, Campbell says you come to an umbilical point, a kind of singularity. How can the ego destroy the ego? This is the hero's adventure. So he is acknowledging the fact that you've got to get rid of the ego. After all, the person who willfully suffers for other people is completely willing to have their ego destroyed. Like literally, they're willing to die for others. So it's not all about validation in those particular instances. Oh, so the ego always portrays itself as the light, and the unconscious mind is always portrayed as the darkness. And the light is always trying to, destroy the darkness. You can't have one without the other, obviously. But it really says something about the ego that thinks it always must be in charge and thinks of itself as the light. Now, if the great hero deed is to get past that, but now you're faced with a problem. Let's say that you do see reality with a capital R. That's enough to drive a lot of people crazy. And John Horgan, in his book, Rational Mysticism, mentions this little parable of I think it's the four rabbis who finally managed to get past the ego, and they're experiencing reality with a capital R. Maybe they're seeing the face of God or something like this. And one of them dies outright. One of them goes insane. One becomes a heretic, and the other is completely blissful and happy as a consequence of this. The point here is that even if you're heroic enough to get past the ego and vanquish it, chances are it's not going to work for you. You're just going to lose your mind. It's a rare thing. So the hero, I think Campbell would even acknowledge this, it's got to be rare. But today, in our commercialized settings, like, everybody's a hero. Everybody needs a pat on the back. Everyone is so successful and wonderful and morally superior, and they completely unwarranted sense of their own intellectual and moral superiority. But there you go. Yeah. But yeah, I do think Campbell would caution us about egomaniacal behavior. Absolutely.